We'll start it with the same process, 1/2 base times height. It doesn't matter which base you choose. Technically it doesn't. The one problem though, if you choose, let's say the triangle was written, but it wasn't necessarily written to scale, it is possible that you would be dealing with an obtuse triangle. So if you don't start with the longest side, so again, I'd always suggest that you start with the longest side as your base, and the reason for that is that altitude will always fall in the interior of your triangle, so you're always going to be able to deal with your right triangle using the right triangle trig stuff. If you happen to, let's say, use one of the shorter two sides as your base, you could still solve it using the methods that I just went through, but you'd have to be able to distinguish. If it is an obtuse triangle, then when you go to find these angles, the height, you may have to imagine that it's being represented as falling outside the figure itself. So to save the problem of having to think about that, easiest thing is to just use the longest side as your base. The way I set this problem up, I put the longest side on the bottom. Most of you will probably use whatever's given on the bottom of your figure as your base. In this particular case, that works. So here's our base of 10. And so that means we need to draw in our altitude or height in order to solve this. Okay, so now if I had this triangle ABC here, which angle would I need in order to find my height, H? B or A? Or either? Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can choose either one. Okay. I heard somebody say B, so let's find angle B in this case. If we find angle B, what method will we have to use in order to find angle B? Law of cosines, right? SSS pattern. So we're going to use law of cosines. Here's our unknown, so we need to begin with the side opposite it. So my law of cosines that I'm going to use is 7 squared is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides minus twice the product of those two sides, all times the cosine of my unknown angle. Okay, so there's my law of cosines that I'm going to be using. We can just enter this in our calculator for the solve feature. Now, remember, when we solve for an angle, what do we need to replace cosine of b with? Yeah, just let that whole thing be your x. That way now, as we go through and solve it using the algebra tab, F2, we can enter the equation just as it appears. 7 squared is equal to 8 squared plus 10 squared minus 2 times 8 times 10, all times x. Now remember, x represents cosine of b. We want to solve for x. And now again, notice nothing that I entered had decimals in it, so I want to hit the green diamond button so I can get my answer in decimal form. And this is going to tell me what the cosine ratio is for angle B. So my cosine ratio is 0.719 approximately. And again, x was really just cosine of b. And so to find my angle B, I'm going to take the inverse cosine of that ratio, and that's going to give me my answer. So if I take the inverse cosine of this value, now I know I'm going to use this angle again. And whatever I get for B, I'm going to use it to solve for my height. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the x equals part off of this. Now it's a short conversion anyway. So if I delete that x equals, I get my angle measure B to be approximately 44 degrees. And so now I can use this right triangle. I know a 44-degree angle. I have an opposite side that's unknown, and I have a hypotenuse that's known. Opposite and hypotenuse are related by which trig ratio? So sine. And so I can set up my calculation. The sine of 44 degrees is equal to opposite h over hypotenuse 8. Isolate my h, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 8 to get rid of that. And now I can substitute in for h right here, 8 times the sine of 44, and I have my final calculation. It's just a matter of entering that in my calculator. So 1 divided by 2 times 10. Again, I understand you can do that with a mental calculation and save a moment or two. I just want you to see where all the pieces come from. Times 8 times the sine of... Now, don't just write 44. We need to use the exact answer. So we'll enter, highlight it from up above. Now I've entered it as a decimal, so my answer will be in a decimal form. And I get my overall area for this triangle to be 27.81 square units. And so that would be my final answer.